Hello, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about our sponsor, Anchor, hopefully at a louder volume this week. First of all, it's free and it has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. I found it really easy to move the segments around in the editing process, and you can put the ads in wherever you want too, which is really helpful. And Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. This has been super helpful with the success of my first episode, having it on all of these platforms for you guys to listen to. And Anchor does that for you, which makes it super easy. And you can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership, which is perfect for people like me who are just starting a brand new podcast. So it's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. If you've been thinking about a podcast you want to start, this is me encouraging you to do it. All you got to do is download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm. That's ANCHOR.FM to get started.
All right, welcome back to Navigating Adulthood and IDD. I'm excited today to be talking to Jessica Leza, a music therapist from Texas. Jessica, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, so like you said, I'm a music therapist. I was born in Houston. I've been board certified music therapist since 2013. I got my master's equivalency at Texas Women's University, and before that, I got my bachelor's degree back in the day in music composition. So I'm one of those that came to the field a little bit later when I was in my 30s and had been doing a lot of different kinds of jobs and read Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks. And the day after I finished it was like, all right, I'm going to sell my business. I'm going to go to grad school. I'm going to become a music therapist. So I haven't really looked back since then.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so you wrote a chapter for Neurodiversity Reader. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that? We're going to dive in deeper for sure, but maybe like a broad explanation of it.
So the Neurodiversity Reader is like an edited anthology that has contributions from all sorts of folks and is covering some different issues in neurodiversity, from people's lived experiences to what are some implications in clinical practice. So I thought that was a really cool opportunity to talk about music therapy in a book that's not actually about music therapy. And so it gives a little bit of first an overview of the history of neurodiversity within the music therapy field. And so I was lucky. I got some folks to help me collect some information about different presentations and papers and different things that have been happening in our music therapy community for the last decade or so. And then the kind of the meat of the essay really goes into more about this idea of what would it look like to neuroqueer music therapy. So what would it mean to apply all of these principles from the neurodiversity movement into music therapy practice? And so that's kind of the cool part. But this is still very like new ideas for me personally, but also just for us as a field of music therapists and just in general for our whole society. So I feel like I'm not presenting this essay or any of this information as saying like, this is it, or I am the expert or the authority, and it's more of like, here are some ideas or some thoughts, some possibilities, and something that we really need to like look more into as music therapists.
Yeah, and I got a chance to read the chapter and really enjoyed it. And I like that you had that disclaimer that was like, I think at the very end you were like, I can't actually tell you how to do this, which is funny because I think there were so many good applicable tips and discussions in your chapter too, but also that like self-aware acknowledgement of like, yeah, we got to keep looking into this. We got to keep really being self-reflective and keep researching and all of that.
I think so, because so much of it is about really fundamentally like almost radically, I think I use that kind of terminology to say, is this like almost radical client-centered work, and to really investigate and know your client as an individual and like tailor everything to them, even if that means you have to throw out some conventional things. And so some of the suggestions I had like one that occurred off the top of my head was to say like that, you know, you're probably working with some people, if they're on the autism spectrum, they may have some sensory differences. So that might mean that you need to leave your essential oils at home. I know that's like kind of a big thing in the field lately, you know, but that's not a hard and fast rule, because, you know, for some other client, you actually, like, I have some clients, they have their own essential oil set. And so that they have it in their classroom, they can pull it out and use it to self-regulate, but it just has to be like very client-centered, I think is kind of the big takeaway. And since every individual is unique, you can't have one hard and fast rule that works for every single person. So I can't really come in and say like, this is how you do it, because
it's gonna change.
Yeah, there's the saying, like, you met one autistic person and you met one autistic person.
Right. And I think you can apply that to anybody. Like you meet one person with Down syndrome, that's one person, and so forth.
And you can look at it like by diagnostic label. You could look at it by race, or you could look at it by class, or you could look at it by gender or sexuality. And so I think, you know, we just have to really be looking at our clients as individuals and find out what are their personal goals and aspirations and interests and strengths, and not so much just get stuck into something like, well, the DSM says that this, and right. I read in this article and it said that you're supposed to say this, you know, like, well, you know, maybe that doesn't always work.
Right. And I feel like these are some topics that have come up on this podcast for sure, working with adults with IDD, but I'm also excited about the topic of neuroqueering, as I think this can apply to every client, because you're right, it's all about like making it really individualized, and that kind of whole person approach with goals, and having them come in as the expert too with the goal making, and not just like applying what we've been told and what we always think we know to, and like I've said this before on the podcast, like putting people in boxes is like what we need to get rid of completely.
Or I think, you know, sometimes doing therapy is really hard. And so I think sometimes we try to make it easier on ourselves by saying like, put ourselves in boxes and put our work in boxes. And then we say, okay, we're going to do a hello song, and now we'll do a movement activity, and now we're going to do a speech activity, and then now we're going to do a motion activity, and then we'll say goodbye, and like just do that for everybody. And well, I mean, is that really serving your client, or is it serving you as a therapist? So.
Yeah, that's so true. And I've definitely been guilty of that for sure too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult job, you know, so we have to have some methods to help ourselves, because we're just human beings. But
yeah, it's that self-reflection piece where it's like, okay, like the outline of a session plan works for a lot of people, and the hello and everything in the middle of goodbye isn't bad necessarily, but yeah, is it working for this one client I'm working with? Is kind of that self-reflection piece versus kind of going through the motions and then realizing like, oh wait, this might not be the best way to approach the session for this individual. Maybe there's another way.
Yeah, and especially, you know, we have limited time with our clients. I see my students for 30 minutes a week. So, you know, sometimes it's like, well, I mean, we can do this thing and maybe they enjoy it, but am I like really helping them to be able to succeed in their life outside of music therapy, you know? So it's good to do things that are fun. People need to enjoy their lives, but when we only have a half hour or an hour with someone, you know, we have to make sure that, like, you know, people are paying for our services. So we need to make sure that we're actually meeting their needs in return for that income. Yeah,
definitely. Awesome. So I was thinking, before we dive into your book a little more, for our listeners, because I think, just thinking of my listeners, some people are going to know the terms, some people might not be as familiar with the terms. So I was wondering if, in your words, you could define neurodiversity and neuroqueering, just so we have that kind of set up before we dive into the book.
Sure. So neurodiversity is just the idea that there is diversity amongst our brains. We all have different types of brains, and this is just a fact. You know, my brain is different from your brain, is different from the person who checked us out at the grocery store compared to our clients. Like, we all are individuals. We all have individual types of brains. And just like diversity is an idea, like diversity is something that enhances our society. You know, we are better able to succeed as a community because we have different types of people when it comes to race or religion or gender or sexuality or any of these kinds of things. And so in the same way that those elements of diversity enhance our society, you know, neurodiversity can also enhance our society. So neurodiversity kind of has two contexts. There's neurodiversity as a fact, like it's just a fact. Mm-hmm. You know, we have biodiversity, there's different types of birds, there's different types of brains, right? But then there's the neurodiversity paradigm, which is like takes that and then puts values onto it. So it says that there's the fact, sorry, I don't know if I'm being clear. There's the fact, and then there's the idea that this is something that's beneficial and something to be embraced and something to be celebrated. And then was there another word that you had?
Yeah, and then neuroqueering, which I mean we'll dive into as well.
So neuroqueering is a word that I feel like a lot less confident to be able to just clearly define. So there are several people who have started to use this term and tried to flesh out some definitions of it. And one is Nick Walker, who is an autistic advocate and writer, and he has a blog called Neurocosmopolitan. And so, you know, that's something that somebody could Google that and pull it up. And he has a great blog where he actually defines like something like maybe 8 different ways to define neuroqueering. And so in my essay, I really just pulled out, I think, maybe 2 definitions and really tried to focus on that because, you know, looking at all 8 definitions is a really big concept. But, you know, roughly it's this idea that something I think a lot of people may not realize is that autistic people, so another way to say that neurodivergent people have maybe a special relationship with gender and sexuality that might be a little bit different. There's a lot more people in the autistic community who are trans, who are queer, who are some form of different sexuality, lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, and the same for gender. And so the community has actually come up with some new terms to describe that gender. So there's gender vague or autigender. And so these are kind of just the idea that, I mean, if you think about it, gender is a performance, you know, it's a social construct. And autistic people often look at social constructs and see them as social constructs. Right. And whereas perhaps neurotypical see the social constructs as something that is more instinctive. I don't know. I can't speak on that as much, but you know, from a neurodivergent perspective, then some of these aspects of gender is very much cultural. It's something that you perform. There's unwritten rules about what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a man. And autistic people tend to struggle with some of those kind of arbitrary, performative, unwritten social rules anyway. So it kind of makes sense maybe that more autistic people would be falling outside of the gender binary or the sexuality binder, you know, just being something more complex than just being straight. So neuroqueer is about this intersection in between a neurodivergence like autism and your gender or sexuality. And so, you know, people have some people will say that being autistic really influences their gender. And some people will say, like, for them, they feel like that they would say, I'm not trans because I'm autistic. Some people might say they actually feel like their gender identity is directly related to being autistic. So I'm not going to say that it's one or the other because this is like so personal for every person. But being neuroqueer as a word, it could be something that is an identity label. So somebody could say, I am neuroqueer, which, you know, might indicate that my neurodivergence impacts my gender performance, or my gender identity or my sexuality. But neuroqueer can also be a verb. And so if we are going to, so that is a lot of what my essay was, because like this is an idea that I read about and I was like, well, I guess I can't show off a podcast, but you know, the make a mind exploding,
mind
exploding
I
meme.
could put like the emoji in the show notes. The mind
Yeah.
exploding.
Yeah. This idea that, you know, you could neuroqueer as a verb, and that could mean something like, wow, like so in that context, to neuroqueer as a verb might mean to like just intentionally be yourself, even if you're being autistic makes your gender performance weird compared to the normal societal expectations. But it's not only just about to neuroqueer is not only about like the person who is neuroqueer being themselves, but you know, so my question in this essay is like, as music therapists, like, can we neuroqueer? Can I neuroqueer in the music therapy space? Can I neuroqueer my therapy? As a therapist, can I do that? And for me, I think that neuroqueer is a word that I could use this to describe myself. So for me, this is a different question maybe than for somebody who would not identify as neuroqueer.
Right.
So I don't know, this is a topic that I don't have a lot of firm answers for. I just have a lot of questions. I'm still learning about it. That's one reason I love this essay, because it was so much of an opportunity for me to learn and for me to like engage in the material and then kind of take the reader along with me as I am on this journey to try to discover, like, what does this mean? And what does it mean for me as a therapist? How does it impact my clinical decisions? Like, how does it impact the way I relate to my clients? I don't know. I need to figure it out. Let's write about it.
Yeah, oh, that's awesome. And I feel like the same way you were like when the first time you were reading about it, your mind was blown. That's kind of how I felt reading your chapter too. Because there's definitely, you know, I haven't heard the term neuroqueering before, one, so there was a lot of like new information that I got from your essay. And then, and you touched on it before, but at the beginning, you just pile like resources of like neurodiversity and music therapy like in one spot, which makes it so much easier to keep researching and educating. And then, yeah, it was just really interesting to read through because I feel like it's a lot of things that I've come to agree with, like maybe approach wise, and like things I've played with but struggled with too in sessions, like trying to change things up from maybe the traditional kind of session plan, how you come in, or even how you think of an intervention and like coming in with that. So it was cool to be like, oh, in a way I've kind of been neuroqueering, but now I have a word for it where I can keep diving in and self-reflecting and continue expanding upon kind of this approach that I've already like kind of honed in onto with that humanistic aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that is, I don't know, is when you see some of this stuff, it seems really obvious. Like,
right.
I think I wrote in the essay, like, music therapy is already radical, you know, that these ideas, like, they feel radical, is to reject some of the things that we've been taught and to embrace things that we've been told don't embrace those things. But the reality is, like, music therapy is already a field where people see us doing therapy and we're the therapy that people say, like, is that therapy? They're just having fun. You know, we're already we're already saying that just speaking is not the only way to communicate. There's other ways to communicate. There's other ways to gain insight in therapy other than sitting on the couch and chatting about it. And, you know, we're already a radical field, but we just need to embrace that, you know?
Yeah. And I love that part of the essay so much. Cause yeah, you're like people are kind of worried maybe like changing things up is radical. And then you like turned it, but you were like, we're already radical. And I was like, what? Yeah, we are. And then you like started listing it out, you know, cause like celebrating like drumming, like as loud as you can, you wouldn't necessarily maybe celebrate that in other environments. I say you can, but maybe not necessarily. But in the music therapy room, like doing things really differently with music is the whole point.
Yeah. And so I think that is something that we are lucky as music therapists, because we have that freedom to be radical. We have the freedom to look at therapy in a new, different way, and you know, to use the creativity and to use art. Like we're already there. And I think like so many music therapists, when they find this information, when they connect with the neurodiversity movement, they're like, oh, it's already so fundamental. This is what is bringing us, so many of us, to the field, you know. And then it almost gets like educated and trained out of us, and we get taught like that we need to go to like the medical system and plead our case and say we're valid, really, look, we have research. But
Right.
like, you know, maybe the thing that we need to do is say, like, you know what, there's something more than research, and it is our individual client who is a full and whole human being, just as they are, you know. So I think we're already there. We just need to embrace it. Just go for it.
Yeah, oh, I love that so much. Yeah, and you kind of started touching on this, and you point out in the essay and just now how the medical model kind of that's where music therapy is getting positioned, like historically, because we've had to advocate like in the past to really get our place in the world, I guess. But then on the flip side, like we kind of get stuck in this medical model. So could you speak on like how can this be problematic?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe we should talk about what is the medical model of disability, because maybe some of your listeners might not be familiar with that terminology. So we all have models of disability. And so our model of disability is like the framework through which we see disability. And so there's many different models. And so a big, broad one that is the medical model of disability. So this is the idea that the impairment is located within the person, and that we need to fix the person. And this is the medical model posits that the experts are people with degrees and doctors, you know, and people who've gone through training programs. And so this has like if we don't question or investigate, this is like our underlying beliefs about disability. You know, we need to examine those things and question those things because that all of our assessment, our treatment planning, our evaluation, and our decisions about discharge are all based fundamentally on those concepts. And so if we are not examining them and honest and aware of our own perspective and aware of the fact that our client may have a different perspective, like there's even a potential that we could be doing harm, you know?
Right.
So that's the medical model, you know, and for some things, the medical model works really well. I did my internship in a hospital, you know, and so there's some aspects of, you see somebody that's hospitalized and they had a stroke or something. And in some cases that the medical model of disability might have full validity. It may not be harmful and it may be helpful. But there's also some other ways to view disability. So the social model is another one that kind of emerged. So the social model is this idea that impairment happens because of the negative ideas from society, because of discrimination, because the lack of accommodations. So a classical example of this is that if someone has a wheelchair, that what disables them is the lack of curb cuts. And you know that if there's a curb cut, they're not disabled and they can go into the building just the same as everybody else. But so it's the social model really asks us to look at society, to look at the people's beliefs, to look at how we're discriminating, to look at the role of ableism, you know, which is a prejudice against disability or disabled people. You know, so, but then a lot of people saying something, if they're positioned from the social model of disability, they might say, I'm only disabled when I leave my house. Mm-hmm. But so here's the reality is that the social model of disability doesn't really account for everything, you know, right. Because some people, they might come home and still feel disabled. So then we have our post-social or holistic model of disability. And this is kind of where I'm finding myself to be positioned currently, which is that there's disability arises from both. It can be impairments that are in the body where you need to go to the expertise of a doctor, and it can be something that's fixed, or you get treatment, you take medication, you get a cure. But then there may also be things that is drawn from the social model. So you might say, like, but there's these other aspects that we need to have change in society, we need to have accommodations, we need to have, you know, kind of acceptance, these kinds of things. So kind of combining them both, I think, allows you to really address the fact that most people, for one thing, most people, they have more than one diagnosis.
Right.
And so if we're looking at people on the autism spectrum, there might be somebody with autism, they might have, for example, epilepsy, right? Or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or a dysautonomia, or something like that. And they might say, like, please cure my epilepsy, but don't cure my autism. So when it comes to an individual, then neither social nor medical model of disability might fully address their needs as an individual. So I'm not sure if that really answered your question.
No, that was good. I think it was almost like a good call out on my question, because you're like, well, the medical model might be okay, and then also the social model might be okay. And I like that idea of combining it, because it all ties back to like, this is an individual and we can't just apply one thing to them and be like, this is going to fix them. I don't like that word anyway, but
and those are just some big broad overviews. And
right.
You can look into different cultures, and especially when like traditional cultures, indigenous cultures might have very different views of disability. And so I think, wow, that's something we really need to consider as therapists, as like that, whatever our model of disability is. Or here's the reality: we might have our own model of disability and then work for a facility or an institution that has a totally different model of disability that they're expecting to see, that they're not going to talk about when they hire you. They're not like, oh, okay, we work from a model of disability, and they might not ever ask things about that. But so we could have such a disparate, we could have like a contrast between, we're working for a facility or an institution that operates on one model of disability, probably the medical model, and then maybe as music therapists, we're working on, let's say we're called a holistic model, but then maybe we have a client who has a model of disability that doesn't even have a proper name, because no scholars have ever thought, like, let me go do research on this.
Yeah.
And if we don't think about it, if we're not like open to this idea that just on a fundamental level that there could be these three different perspectives all taking an influence, and how do we decide what our treatment plan is? How do we decide what are valid goals? How do we make those clinical decisions? How do we write our paperwork? Who qualifies for therapy? When do they get discharged? All of those questions come back to our model of disability in some way, or our model of disability can influence how we answer those, and our clients' model of disability, like how they see themselves and how their community and their family sees them. Like, that's really important, So something I learned recently that I think helps me I think about this a lot, is that, people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia in the global South and developing countries actually have better long-term outcomes than people diagnosed with schizophrenia in the US and the Western world. And so, it's maybe that in the Western world, we're using this medical model, and for people with schizophrenia, maybe they're not actually being served by that, as well as, other ways of looking at it.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. And really interesting. I didn't know that. So that's cool too. And something to think about, like, taking on all the information and figuring out, like, is there a different way to approach it? Because it comes down to our documentation. It affects it, like the whole way, like the whole treatment with our clients, like what models we're working from, and trying to figure out for individuals what works best for each one.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know if I should even mention this book, because like off the top of my head I can't remember the title, but so I was reading a book that's kind of critical of the medical industry, and it had an anecdote where like a therapist had their schizophrenic client had said something like, oh, is this letter a telephone, like a mail, a letter from the mail, is this a telephone? And instead of just writing that comment off as a symptom of thought disorder, the therapist took that and kind of guided the client. They ended up writing some poetry using that material, and it ended up being like a hugely beneficial way. And so, I think in some degrees, it's a matter of like just not pathologizing those things, and seeing that, maybe something that we see as a symptom of disorder, like, is it possible that something we're labeling as a symptom of disorder could Could there be something positive in that? Could it show a hidden strength? Is there a way to work with that without just labeling like, that's disorder, you're delusional, like you're crazy, you know? But you think about it, and that is so compatible with music therapy. I mean, this person heard a person make a strange statement, and instead of saying like, you're really weird, but why are you saying that? They say like, oh, let's write a poem. Like, well, music therapists are doing that all the time.
Right.
So like, we really, as a field, we could be trailblazers. You know, we could be the leaders here. If you want, you know, for music therapists who are working in the US, working in the Western world, we're working in this system that is dominated by the medical model, that it's dominated by pathologizing views. Like, you know, we could be leaders. We just got to step up. Like, this is our opportunity.
Right.
So,
like you said, embrace it. And like, that seems like a really good example of like, that would be neuroqueering in a session, is instead of writing something off, considering like that strength in it, or making it part of the art and the creation that we do anyway in sessions.
Yeah, this is what we're already doing, you know. Students are there for practicum level 1 students are like so ready to already be taking this outlook to say like, you have these materials. Like, I think another example is like a big thing that I think music therapists everywhere will be able to see this in their practice is like stimming. So stimming is also like, for people who are not familiar with that term, stimming, it could be called stereotypy, self-stimulatory behavior, or repetitive behavior. So when an autistic person might be stereotyped as a flapping hands, you know, or making some movements with their fingers, like repetitive movements. But if you think of like, what is a repetitive movement? You add music to it. Well, now this is a dance, because what is dancing except for like repetitive organized movement? And so we already have this huge tool to like normalize things and say like, that's not something abnormal, that's art.
Right.
You know, and so we're already there. We just need to accept it, and just, instead of trying to pretend that we're doing something else, just say like, no, we're just this is art. This is art. We make art. It's therapeutic. We're helping people. They're individuals. Like, we don't have to put everybody down for being different all the time. We don't have to make people conform. We don't have to make people indistinguishable from their peers. It's not going to work anyway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love that. And I think sometimes maybe music therapists get stuck, especially if like you're working with kids and the parents are in the room. I think there's like this disconnect where you're like, oh, like, and maybe this comes from like that medical model where, and I've had this before in my head, I'm like, these parents are going to think like, this isn't therapy, this is crazy. And it's taken some self-work to be like, no, like, stand your ground, like, this is art. You can communicate with the parents, tell them what you're doing, and hopefully, you know, and bring them into that understanding, maybe even into the collaboration, versus like being like, oh, I'm the therapist and I need to make sure everyone thinks that this looks like therapy, because that's, you know, that's not helping the client when you're afraid of those appearances. And I had to work through that as a young professional for sure.
Ooh, I'm still working for that now, especially with this teletherapy all of a sudden, because we are like, we are zooming into people's homes, you know. And so I have a parent who is like telling their child to, oh, like, sit still and look at the computer, make eye contact with them. Oh, lady, I'm not even making eye contact with you.
Yeah, I can barely look at the camera when I'm like, you know. So I don't know, I don't have a solution for that, because these are parents who are in their own homes, parenting their own children. And like, what sometimes, if I've just more recently met them, you know, I don't feel confident about being like, no, let your child run around. Like, you know, like, don't make, you know, so with some parents, because I've been able to know them longer, like, we have much more open lines of communication. But yeah, you know, and then I feel that pressure of being like, oh, like, they're not going to take me seriously as a therapist unless I'm conforming to these ideas of what they think therapy is. And they know ABA, you know, and so they're like, quiet hands, quiet mouth. And like, if you saw me in the school with your child, like, they are
walk around the room, you know, like what do we need to do? Like I bring toys to stim with, much less like I'm not going to be saying to stop stimming, you know.
Right.
So I mean, I think that some of that is the parents, they're trying to do their best, and they've been taught also about, and then they may be also feeling that pressure from society to conform. They're probably feeling like, oh, I'm being judged as a parent because my child won't sit still. And it's like, can we just all stop judging each other?
Yes.
Especially, I mean, I know this is a podcast about adults, but like, yeah, let adults be free. They want to move around the room. Like, why do we have to judge them for that? Why do we have to judge an adult if they want to flick their fingers? Like, let's worry about things that are harmful and dangerous.
Right.
You know, but there's so many things that are not harmful and not dangerous that just get shut down. And like, can we stop judging each other for that? Because the parents are worried about being judged as parents, and I'm worried about being judged as a therapist. And this, meanwhile, the client is getting judged from society, from their parents, from their therapist. And like, are we helping?
Right.
Is that helping them? You know, like what is the point of therapy?
Right. And I can see how telehealth brings this, like, it's a whole new frontier almost. And I feel like it started a lot of people over like this year, like no matter how far in your career you are, it's like, this is new, like we're starting over. And that's been difficult. Yeah. I'm no expert in that for sure, as I'm still learning, but I found that I just try to keep talking with parents more and more. It's so hard if a kid online elopes, like that's like what I have the hardest time with, because yeah, in person you can almost have a larger area where you can explore, but you know, if they walk off screen, then you're stuck, you know. So
like, I mean, yeah, I think we just all need time. This is like a really hard time for all of us. And so I just try to remind myself of that, and like everybody's getting fed and people are alive, then I guess that's a good start. So
yeah,
we'll go from there. If my student manages to sign on at all and the internet is working well enough and we're able to do anything, like if they elope partial the way through, I'm like, well, you know what, like I saw them, I can verify that they are alive. Like that's a good start.
Yeah,
we'll go from there.
Yeah, this year I feel like it's about meeting those basic needs for sure, and then like just keep meeting the basics and go from there.
Yeah, I'm just like, all right, let's just like get into a habit where we log on every week at the same time, and then we'll figure it out.
Then we'll figure out. Yeah.
I'll sing a song about fruit salad.
That's awesome. All right. So I kind of one of my last topics here, and we've been talking about it, so like the idea of neuroqueering in music therapy specifically, and we've been discussing it. So I had a question, and I was thinking, like, you know, if someone is kind of stuck in an old therapeutic dynamic or however they learn to do things, and they're interested in shifting but feel like uncomfortable, do you have any like tips or mindset shifts? Obviously this is work that we're still doing and it takes time, but for somebody who's like, I want to do this today but I don't know what to do, what would you say?
I think that, you know, if we're taught, I think that it's not like a quick solution, but if you just go, and if you're working with autistic people, go learn from autistic people, read books written by autistic people, read blogs, go on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, go on Twitter and find autistic people and follow them. If you're working with people with Down syndrome, like do the same thing. There's a book called Count Me In that is written by two young men with Down syndrome. Like go read that. It's written, they're both adults when they're written. I don't remember their name, but it's called Count Me In. Yeah, so, you know, go find the folks who are living that every single day. People are out there educating us therapists for free. You know, there are people on Twitter and they are teaching a master class, and all we have to do is log in and listen. You know, there's so many books. I think a great book for therapists is called What Every Autistic Girl Wishes Her Parents Knew. And off the top of my head, I don't remember the editors, but that is some edited anthology that has many, many, many authors. And they're just is kind of writing open letters to say, like, this is what I wish my parents had known. And even though, as you know, therapists, this is what my therapist wish I'd known, but it still has so much insight that we can apply to our practice, or that we could just help get that perspective shift and to help get into the experiences of what our clients are going through. Yeah, so there's like just lots of materials like that. Just learn from your clients, you know, be willing to not be the expert, be willing to say like, you know, I don't think I can quote it exactly, but there's someone said like roughly that having 1,000 degrees that you can put on the wall can make you an expert in a field of study, but it cannot make you an expert in a way of being, you know. So just if you need that, if you're looking for that perspective shift, just go seek out people who have those lived experiences and read it. And you know, the reality is that there's a lot of like, it's not all flowers and bunnies and sunshine, you know, there's a lot of serious and kind of dark things that you will learn about people's experiences. And you might, you know, people need to be prepared for the fact that they might learn something that somebody might say like, oh, this has really harmed me in therapy. And then they might look back and think, oh no, like I did that as a therapist, you know. So we have to be prepared to even go through that process of looking back on our past work and just dealing with that baggage. So I know that can be really hard. And for some people, they start to engage with those materials. They'll engage with autistic activists and get really angry and say, I'm being attacked, you know, or where you don't understand because you're, you know, a lot of autistic activists will hear like, someone will say, well, you're not like my autistic child, or you're not like my autistic client, but like, they don't really know what that person was like as a child, you know, because when you look at an autistic adult, you shouldn't expect them to be like a child. No adult is going to, of course, they're different than a child. Right. Children and adults are different. Adults have had many decades to help develop their skills and learn about the world. So we shouldn't expect children and adults to be the same. But, you know, so yeah, it can be a rough road, and it can require a lot of that personal work. It's been a big journey for me, you know, having to confront like that we all have been sort of raised in societies and cultures that have ableism to one degree or in one way or another. And so that's kind of just like we have to work to undo our racism that we are raised with, living in a white supremacist society. We live in an ableist society. We have to confront that, and it's hard work. And so when you go read what every autistic girl wishes her parents knew, then, you know, there's people talking about things that happen in therapy and what impact that had on their life that is like really serious, and that can be hard to read about. And so I just urge people who are going on this journey to do it like with a very open mind and an open heart, and have, you know, I almost want to say like, be ready to have some forgiveness for yourself and to work through that and move on and change. If you engage with the materials and you decide, I need to make a change, like just have that patience and compassion for yourself that you need so that you can actually go and make those changes. And then together as a community, we can all just grow and become better therapists. You know, we'll do that work that we do every day, that we're trying to make this world less painful and make it the world a little better. I think that I ended that essay with like, I think that it's a Maxwell Sparrow says something about like work to make the world's heart bigger. And I thought like that is a great goal for therapists. That's something that we can do with our advocacy. So that's what I kind of feel like, I don't know, maybe we're seems like we're wrapping up, but I guess that is like the thing that I'm trying to do is we're going to just work to make the world's heart bigger, you know? So that's what, I guess that's my takeaway.
Yeah. Oh, that was awesome. And I made sure to write down all the books. I'll try to get them in the show notes, do some Googling. But yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I would even throw in, like, if you have supervision, this could be something great to bring in, and then have that extra support if those difficult emotions and kind of like struggles and obstacles and doing the work comes up, then maybe there's somebody there to help support you with that too.
Yeah, get some supervision, get some counseling, talk to your priest. I don't know, and you do what you need to do, you know, do some journaling.
Right. But I like that you're giving that kind of permission to people of like I do the work, but also be ready. It's
hard because, you know, like the reality is that I mean, we didn't bring this up yet, but this is something I've seen a lot because people will talk about ABA. And in the autistic community, you know, the consensus is that ABA can be very traumatic and abusive. And so, you know, we got a lot of music therapists who are involved in ABA. I myself used to work as an ABA therapist, not doing music therapy. I needed a job, you know, and I was in grad school. And so my friend was like, hey, you can get this job and it's therapy. And I'm like, I don't really know what ABA is, but whatever, I need a job, you know. And so the reality is that, you know, this is a type of therapy that a lot of people experience as traumatic, even if it pleases their parents, even if it pleases the caregivers or the teachers. And so a lot of music therapists who have been trained in that, you know, when they start engaging in the materials, finding out that ABA is traumatizing people, then that's really hard to hear. If you're a therapist, you want to help people and you find out like your work, it could be harmful, like that is a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, they shut down and they stop engaging with the material. But I just want, like, if there's anybody out there that this is the situation you're in, you're listening, like, just keep centered on the fact that, like, you got into this field because you wanted to help people. And so it's hard work. You just have to keep your heart open and be willing to learn and be willing to change. And like you said, get a supervision, get counseling if you need it. Like, there's community out there. People will help you to work through this material. Like, you don't have to shut down and close yourself off, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Jessica, I feel like we could talk for hours. I even have like questions I didn't get to, but I feel like we've wrapped it up a bit, so I don't know if we should go backwards. So yeah.
Maybe we can just do part 2 in the future.
Yeah. And with that, is there anything else you would like to discuss? I'll save my questions for the future. / we've covered some of it. You know what I don't want to backtrack too much.
Well, I guess something is that in November is Autistic History Month, and that is coming up soon. And I'm not sure when this podcast will publish, but maybe it will be during Autistic History Month. And so, you know, for the listeners, then that might be a thing that if you are working as a therapist, you could maybe involve that. If you do holidays, you have holidays in your themed in your session, you know, or just for yourself personally, you could use that as an opportunity to seek out some information about autistic history.
That's awesome. So this will come out like right at the end of October, like week of Halloween, but I feel like that's perfect because I tend to post like once a month, so the next one won't be till like the end of November probably. So this is kind of November's podcast in a way.
Perfect. Yeah. So it's timely.
It's very timely. That's awesome. Sweet. So where can people find the Neurodiversity Reader?
Well, it is published by, oh goodness, is it Pavilion Publishing or Pavilion Press? I really should know this. But it's also available on Amazon. And last I heard, they're actually starting the second print. And so I had seen that it was available on Amazon, and then it was saying that it was sold out. And I'm not sure if that's just like an issue because it's just published, or if they sold all the copies of it. So I think that it's already going into its second printing. But yeah, it's edited by Damian Milton.
Awesome. And I highly recommend it. I'm so glad I got to read it for this podcast. It was such a good read, and it's one I'm going to go back to because you have all those awesome resources, and it just ends really beautifully too, with like the focus on love and kind of like that's the core of what we're doing. And yeah, so I really recommend it, and I don't know, I feel like I could go on and on about it. I liked it so much.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I'm excited about it even just as a piece of writing, because I think like it's an opportunity to write about music therapy in a, I think, pseudo scholarly, you know. So there's some of it that I feel is like very poetic, and it was really nice to be able to write about music therapy in that way. Almost in I tried to write about it almost like using an autistic writing style, you know, because I mean we're doing an art form. When we're making music, we're doing art, and so we can write about music therapy in a way that is like artistic and expressive of that. So I thought like it was really cool experience to write. I'm really proud of it. I can't wait to hear more about what people think. So I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me. giving me the chance to talk about all this stuff. Especially like trying to work through like, oh, what does it mean? What does neuroqueer mean? Like, oh, well, let's talk more in 6 months. Maybe I'll have a cleaner answer for that. But thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Is there a way listeners could reach you if they have any questions?
I've got email. I've got my website is jessicalatha.com. And so my name is spelled Leza. And
Awesome.
so I don't know if that has my email address, but my email is the same. So that's probably a good way. I'm on Facebooks, all of those. I'm out there.
Me too. I feel like that's what I say too. If people ask me, I'm like, yeah, Facebook, Instagram, you'll find me.
I'm on Instagram, but I mostly just post pictures of flowers from my garden.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, that's what Instagram's for. Mine's mostly my cat. So.
I mean, the internet is basically made for cats, so it seems appropriate.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise. Maybe there'll be a part 2, we'll see. But I'm really excited to share this with listeners, especially with the Autistic History Month coming up. I think this is a great way for people to reflect and to think about neuroqueering and neuroqueer and kind of learn more about those terms and how they can use those in their practice and their lives. So just really excited to share that. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
All right, I hope that you enjoyed that wonderful conversation with Jessica as much as I did. There are so many good takeaways. I highly recommend maybe listening to it again, taking notes, diving into all the awesome resources that will be in the show notes to continue educating ourselves and exploring and being really curious about this idea of neuroqueering and how to have radical client-centered work. So I'll try to debrief just a couple of points, but so much of the conversation was so good. So a takeaway for me was mixing up session plans, not for the sake of mixing up the order of the session plan, but really like considering what is serving the client best. And I loved how Jessica talked about kind of trying to see strengths instead of seeing symptoms of pathology. Like, is what is being presented really causing harm? What's serving the client best? Coming back to that radical client-centered work. And to embrace ourselves as music therapists, to embrace the radical nature, embrace it, was such a wonderful takeaway from Jessica too. And kind of, I feel like our challenge for listeners is to embrace the radical work that we can do in music therapy, the way that we can see things differently and try things differently with music in that really exploratory way, and not be scared to let the client be the expert and to learn from the client and to know we're not going to be expert in everything, and to really learn from the clients what is best for them in that kind of collaborative way. So I think I just want to sum up with I feel like this episode really highlights the importance of listening to autistic voices. And like Jessica said, Autistic History Month is in November. So maybe share this with somebody that you think would enjoy the episode, or somebody who works with autistic people but everybody's going to, encounter autistic people in their lives. So really, I feel like we could share this with anyone. We feel like it would be important because there were a lot of important takeaways and knowledge in the podcast and in the show notes. And so just that important. So let's keep learning from our clients. Let's keep learning from autistic voices. Let's keep listening, let's keep educating, and at the end of the day, it's doing what is truly best for the client and allowing the client to be part of that decision too, of what's best for the client, so that we can heal with music, so that, we can really kind of put more love and peace out into the world with our music work, or if you're another professional working with your equivalent work as well. And I think all professionals could take away a lot from this conversation, especially if you're working with adults with IDD, of how can we neuroqueer our sessions, how can we see strengths, how can we radically make it client-centered work, even when, music therapy might not be at play. How can your work be radically client-centered, and how can you see your clients and learn from them as experts? So yeah, again, just a wonderful conversation. I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been excited to dive into the extra materials. The essay that Jessica wrote is wonderful, so I highly recommend the Neurodiversity Reader, and really just hope that you take a lot away from the session so that we can continue to provide the best most ethical services for our autistic clients and for all of our adults with IDD clients and for all of our clients, really. So yeah, really, really awesome conversation. Please check out the show notes. There'll be a lot there. So to end the episode, we're going to do what we do every episode and go over to the monthly music therapy session plan. So here's my October plan, just in time for Halloween. Here's the outline. Hello to the Addams Family. Drumming/movement to Monster Mash. Songwriting, a haunted house musical soundscape where clients can choose different instruments to match a story. And then a sensory relaxation bubble cauldron to In the Hall of the Mountain King. And then it ends with goodbye. So for the breakdown of this outline, it is posted on our Patreon page at Patreon/Navigating Adulthood and IDD. For $5 a month, I post a breakdown of the music therapy monthly session plan, including a written and video breakdown explaining how I would implement every single intervention, what you would need, and some links to resources and visuals that you could use in the session as well. And then you also get an ad-free version of the episode 1 week early for all Patreon navigators, I like to call them, for $5 a month. So if you'd like to support the podcast and be a part of this little community, I'd love to have you, and you can check it out. If you're not a music therapist, I would really love to know, what kind of resources are you looking for? If you want to let me know, you can message me on Instagram or send me an email at bonnie@rhythmicrootsmusictherapy.org. I would love to know, what kind of resources are you looking for, because I feel like my monthly music therapy session plan really serves the music therapists, but I would love to help serve more professionals too with this awesome population. And then other ways to support the podcast: share this with a friend, rate us on iTunes, and keep listening. And thank you for listening. And again, this episode I was so excited about, and please share it for Autistic History Month and really dive into those resources in the show notes. Special thanks to Jessica again for coming on and having that awesome conversation. So I hope you guys all have a happy Halloween, and I will you'll all hear me next month. This podcast is by Rhythmic Roots Music Services, LLC, with content and music produced by Bonnie Haupt. Thanks for listening.